University Professor John was recently interrupted by an uninvited stranger hovering over him. An adorable bobcat, whom John named Fiona, showed up one day and suddenly became enamored with the skylight above the professor's office. The glass acted as a one-way mirror. She couldn't see him, but he could see every ridiculous nap position, every dream-twitching paw, every undignified sprawl. "This girl spends a lot of time sleeping over me as I work," John wrote. "The funny thing is, she never sees me through the glass." Fiona had no idea someone was watching her from below as she slept, making her naps on John's roof all the more comfortable. But when Fiona discovered the truth and their eyes finally met through the glass, what happened next? No one was prepared for that. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The silence in Professor John Sterling's home was not exactly empty, but it was heavy. It was the specific kind of silence that settles into a house when the children have grown up and moved to the coasts. The wife has passed on to a place where the tea is always warm, and the only remaining occupant is a man whose best conversations are usually held with 19th century literature. John, an emeritus professor of American history at a small, prestigious liberal arts college in the foothills of Boulder, Colorado, lived a life of rhythmic predictability. He was 72 years old, possessing a mind that was still sharp as a tack, but knees that frequently filed formal complaints about the stairs. His home, a sprawling craftsman bungalow nestled against the edge of a pine-dense canyon, was his sanctuary. It was filled with the scent of old paper, lemon polish, and the faint, dusty aroma of solitude. The heart-wrenching truth, one that John rarely admitted even to himself during his morning coffee, was that he was becoming invisible. It is a peculiar tragedy of the elderly in America. One slowly fades from the vibrant foreground of society into the blurry background. The students he still occasionally advised looked through him rather than at him. The cashier at the grocery store spoke slower and louder, assuming his hearing was fading along with his relevance. His days were measured in cups of coffee, chapters read, and the slow, creeping lengthening of shadows across his study floor. He spent the majority of his time in that study. It was an addition to the house built in the late 90s, distinguished by a massive architectural skylight, a large pane of reinforced tinted glass angled toward the southern sun. It was meant to bring light to his manuscripts, but mostly it just highlighted the dust motes dancing in the air, emphasizing how still his world had become. Until the Tuesday of the Thump. It was mid-October. The aspens were flaming gold on the mountains, and the air had that crisp, snapping bite that warned of coming snow. John was grading a dissertation on the Industrial Revolution, his red pen hovering over a split infinitive when a sound echoed through the room. Thump! It wasn't the scatterbrained scrabble of a squirrel, nor the heavy, clumsy plod of a raccoon. This was substantial, yet controlled. A heavy velvet weight. John looked up, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. There, centered perfectly in the rectangle of the skylight, was a puddle of fur. From his vantage point below, it looked like a beige cloud had decided to make a crash landing. Then, the cloud rearranged itself. A paw, massive and broad, pressed against the glass. Even through the tint, John could see the distinct dark paths. "Well," John whispered to the empty room, his voice cracking slightly from disuse. "Hello there." The creature shifted, rolling onto its side. A short, bobbed tail twitched. The profile became unmistakable. It was Lynx rufus. A bobcat, a magnificent wild American predator, was currently treating the roof of a tenured history professor like a heated lazy-boy recliner. John sat frozen. He knew enough about local wildlife to know that bobcats were elusive, solitary, and generally wanted nothing to do with humans. They were the ghosts of the forest. To see one was rare. To have one sleeping directly above your head while you critiqued a thesis statement was statistically impossible. He named her Fiona within the hour. It just seemed to fit. She had a regal, slightly dismissive air about her, even from the underside. This marked the beginning of the most unusual, hilarious, and deeply touching friendship of John Sterling's life. And the best part? The friendship was entirely one-sided, or so it seemed. Because of the angle of the sun and the reflective coating on the skylight's exterior, the glass acted as a one-way mirror. From the outside, the skylight looked like a dark, shiny pool of water or a slab of black obsidian. Fiona could see her own reflection, the swaying pine trees and the sky. She could not see the elderly man sitting 6 feet below her, holding his breath and staring up at her fluffy white belly. Fiona had found the perfect hideout. The heat from John's office rose, warming the glass, creating a heated floor in the middle of the chilly autumn air. She had found a magical warm spot, high above the dangers of coyotes and mountain lions, where she could nap in total secrecy. Or so she thought. "You have no idea, do you, girl?" John murmured, abandoning his grating entirely. He carefully reached for his phone, a newer model his son had insisted he buy, which John usually treated with suspicion, and snapped a photo. The image was undignified in the most delightful way. It was a chaotic assembly of spotted fur, tucked paws, and smushed cheek. Fiona was fast asleep, her mouth slightly open, completely oblivious to her audience. The routine set in quickly. Every day, around 2 p.m., just as the sun hit the sweet spot on the roof, the thump would occur. John found himself rushing through his morning routine, skipping his usual slow perusal of the newspaper, just to be in his chair, ready and waiting. He began to notice the nuances of her behavior. He learned that she groomed herself meticulously for 10 minutes before settling down. He learned that she preferred to sleep in a shape that resembled an oversized furry donut. He learned that occasionally she would dream, her paws twitching against the glass as she chased phantom rabbits through the ether. John started a blog. It was a suggestion from his granddaughter Emily, who visited on Sundays. "Grandpa, you can't just keep these photos on your phone," she had said, scrolling through the camera roll, which was now 90% bobcat underbelly and 10% accidental photos of the inside of John's pocket. "People love this stuff. It's the internet. Cats are the currency." "It's not a cat, Emily. It's a wild predator," John had argued, though he was secretly pleased by her interest. They called the blog the Roofmate Diaries. John's writing, usually reserved for dry academic journals, found a new, whimsical voice. He chronicled Fiona's naps with the gravity of a historical event. Entry 14. October 28th. The Queen has returned. Today's position can only be described as the spatchcocked turkey. She is sprawled with zero regard for modesty. I am currently beneath her, editing a chapter on the Civil War, while she is above me, likely dreaming of eviscerating a vole. The duality of man and beast has never been so stark, nor so fluffy. She suspects nothing. I am the voyeur of the vernal equinox. The reaction was slow at first, but then explosive. People from all over the country began to tune in. They loved the contrast. The serious, intellectual professor and the goofy, oblivious wildcat. John, who had felt his connection to the world fraying, suddenly found himself reading comments from strangers in Ohio, Florida, and Oregon. "She looks so soft, wrote user CatLady44. I love how she thinks she's invisible. Classic cat logic, commented HistoryBuff99. John found himself responding. He engaged in conversations. He felt a spark of purpose return. He wasn't just an old man in a big house anymore. He was the guardian of the skylight, the keeper of Fiona's secret. But the humor was layered with a profound tenderness. Watching Fiona sleep became a meditation for John. Observing the rise and fall of her chest, he felt a kinship with her. They were both solitary creatures, carving out a warm spot in a world that could be cold and indifferent. She was surviving the wild. He was surviving the quiet. I don't know whether she thinks I'm beneath her, John wrote in a particularly reflective post, but physically I certainly am. I am underneath her, editing and envying. I envy her ability to rest so completely. We humans, we worry. We fret about legacy and time. Fiona simply is. She trusts the glass. She trusts the warmth. She's entirely in the present moment. The weeks turned into months. Winter came, and the visits became even more crucial for Fiona. The glass was likely the warmest thing for miles. Sometimes she arrived with snow matted in her fur, shivering, only to melt into a puddle of contentment within minutes of hitting the heated pane. John would turn up the thermostat in his office, sweating in his tweed jacket, just to ensure the glass remained toasty for her. "You're spoiling a wild animal, John," he scolded himself, wiping his forehead. But he didn't turn the heat down. Then came the day the illusion shattered. It was a bright Tuesday in January. The sun was particularly harsh, glaring off the snow and creating a brilliant, piercing light. John was on a Zoom call with the university dean, a rare occurrence, trying to explain why he wouldn't be attending the spring mixer. "It's just that my schedule is quite full, Dean Miller," John was saying, lying smoothly. Above him, Fiona stirred. She stood up, stretched a stretch that seemed to elongate her spine by 3 feet, and began to groom her paws. Then, it happened. Perhaps a cloud moved, shifting the lighting. Perhaps the angle of the sun hit the glass just right, neutralizing the reflection. Fiona paused mid-lick. She froze. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, she lowered her head. Her eyes, gold and piercing, locked onto the glass. But this time, they didn't slide over the surface. They penetrated it. John stopped talking. "Professor Sterling, are you there?" the dean asked. John didn't answer. He was locked in a stare down with a 20-pound bobcat. Fiona's expression shifted from sleepy contentment to absolute horrified bewilderment. Her pupils dilated. She looked at John. She looked at the computer screen. She looked at the piles of books. She had been discovered. Her secret fortress of solitude was actually a display case. "Finally, Fiona has spotted me," John later dictated to his blog, his hands shaking slightly as he typed. The look on her face, it wasn't fear exactly. It was deep, personal offense. It was the look of someone who realizes they have been singing in the shower while the entire choir was listening. On the roof, Fiona panicked. She didn't just leave. She scrambled. Claws scrabbling against the metal frame, she did a cartoonish burnout and launched herself into the nearest pine tree. John sat in the silence, his heart sinking. "Hello?" the dean said. "John?" "I have to go," John said, ending the call. He stared at the empty skylight. The blue sky mocked him. He had blown it. The magic was gone. She knew he was there, and she was a wild animal. Wild animals do not cohabitate with humans who stare at them. She would find a new spot, a hollow log or a rocky overhang, somewhere cold and hard, but private. The next 3 days were the longest of John's year. The skylight remained empty. The 2 p.m. hour arrived and passed with agonizing emptiness. John sat in his chair, neck craned upward, waiting for a shadow that never came. The silence of the house, which had been kept at bay by his furry roofmate, came rushing back with a vengeance. The heart-wrenching reality of his situation hit him hard. He realized he hadn't just been watching a cat. He had been participating in a relationship. He had felt needed in a strange, abstract way. Without her, the office felt like a tomb. His blog readers were equally distraught. "Where is she? Did you scare her off, Professor? Please tell us she's okay." John felt a heavy guilt. He shouldn't have been there. He should have covered the glass. He had intruded on her nature. On the 4th day, a storm rolled in. Heavy, wet snow blanketed Colorado. The temperature dropped to single digits. John sat by his fireplace, staring at the flames, worrying. Was she cold? Was she hungry? The life of a bobcat is average only 7 years in the wild. Nature is cruel and indifferent. He went to his office, driven by a desperate hope. He cranked the thermostat up to 80 degrees. The room became a sauna. "Come back," he whispered to the ceiling. "I promise I won't look. I'll put a blanket over my head. Just come back to the warmth." He sat there for hours, sweat trickling down his back, refusing to leave. And then, thump. It was softer this time. Hesitant. John froze. He didn't look up. He kept his eyes glued to his desk surface. He held his breath until his lungs burned. There was a scratching sound. Then the familiar creak of the glass taking weight. Slowly, carefully, John raised his eyes, moving only his eyeballs, keeping his head perfectly still. Fiona was back, but she wasn't sleeping. She was sitting in a tight crouch, staring directly down at him. She was testing him. She was weighing the pros and cons. On one hand, there was the creepy man in the tweed jacket who lived in the hole below. On the other hand, the glass was warm and her paws were freezing. John blinked slowly. A slow blink, a signal of trust in the animal kingdom. He had read about this in his research. "I am not a threat. I am just part of the furniture." Fiona stared. She held his gaze for a long, tense minute. Then, with a definitive huff that fogged the glass slightly, she circled twice and collapsed. She didn't sprawl this time. She stayed in a semi-alert loaf, but she stayed. "I think she's forgiven me," John wrote that night, the relief making his fingers fly across the keyboard. Or rather, she favors a sport where she can sunbathe in safety more than she values her pride. She has calculated the risk, and the warmth is worth the price of admission, which is me watching her. The relationship changed after that. It became more honest. Fiona knew he was there and she didn't care. Sometimes she would even look down and watch him work. If he moved too quickly, her ears would swivel, tracking him. They were no longer secret roommates. They were acknowledged cohabitants. But as spring approached, the visits became sporadic. February turned to March, and Fiona would vanish for days at a time. The frantic worry returned to John's chest. "She's wild, Dad," his son, Michael, told him over the phone. "She's got things to do. Mating season, hunting. You can't expect her to be a house cat. I know, John snapped, uncharacteristically irritable. I know she's not a pet, but she felt like family. By April, she was gone completely. The skylight was just a window again. The blog followers slowly drifted away, interest waning as the content dried up. John felt the old grayness returning. He considered selling the house. It was too big, too full of echoes. Maybe a condo in Florida would be better. Less snow. No skylights to remind him of what he was missing. He began packing books in late May. He was taping up a box of Civil War biographies when a sound stopped him. Scrabble, thump, squeak. It wasn't the heavy velvet thump of Fiona. It was a chaotic, multi-limbed commotion. John looked up. Fiona was there. She looked thinner, her coat a bit ragged, shedding her winter wool. But she wasn't alone. Tumbling around her, slipping on the glass, batting at her ears, were 3 balls of fuzz. Kittens. John gasped, dropping the tape gun. It clattered loudly, but the cats on the roof didn't care. They were too busy engaged in a wrestling match. Fiona looked down through the glass. She locked eyes with John. There was a tiredness in her gaze, the exhaustion of a new mother, but also something that John, in his romantic historian heart, interpreted as pride. "Look," she seemed to say, "this is why I was gone." The kittens were chaos incarnate. One was trying to eat a pine needle. Another was attacking Fiona's tail. The third was simply face-planted on the warm glass, limbs splayed in a miniature version of his mother's favorite pose. John laughed. A genuine, belly-shaking laugh that cleared the dust from his lungs. He sat in his chair, tears streaming down his face, watching the future unfold above him. Fans of Fiona may be pleased to know she has become a mother of 3, John typed later, his decision to sell the house completely forgotten. She has no more leisure to hang about with me as she is currently acting as a jungle gym for 3 hooligans. But she brought them here. She brought them to the warm spot. The realization hit him with the force of a revelation. She hadn't just come back for the heat. She had brought her vulnerable, precious offspring to the one place she knew was safe. She had brought them to him. In the wild, a mother bobcat moves her den frequently to avoid predators. She is paranoid, careful, and secretive. Yet, she had chosen the roof of the man who watched her. The summer that followed was the brightest of John's life. The Roofmate Diaries became a sensation again, documenting the growth of the kittens, whom the internet named Snap, Crackle, and Pop. John watched them learn to stalk leaves. He watched them grow from stumbling fluff balls into sleek, agile predators. He watched Fiona turn from a sleeping beauty into a fierce, protective matriarch. John wasn't invisible anymore. He was the narrator of a nature documentary that was unfolding in his own home. His neighbors stopped by to ask about the cats. His students asked to see the photos. He even gave a lecture at the local library about urban wildlife, drawing a standing room-only crowd. "We think we are separate from nature," John told the audience, standing tall, his voice strong. "We think our houses isolate us from the wild. But if we are lucky, if we are quiet, and if we have a very good skylight, we realize that we are just neighbors. We are all just looking for a warm spot to rest." As autumn returned, the kittens, now nearly grown, began to venture off on their own. The visits grew shorter again. John knew that one day, perhaps soon, Fiona would stop coming. She would grow too old, or the territory would shift, or nature would take its inevitable course. I'm under no illusions that it won't last long, John said to Emily one afternoon as they watched Fiona grooming Crackle on the glass. They grow up. They leave. That's the way of things. Are you sad? Emily asked, taking his hand. John looked at the skylight. The glass was scratched, covered in paw prints and pine sap. It was beautiful. No, John smiled, squeezing her hand. I'm not sad. I was lonely, Emily. I was waiting for the end. But she taught me something important. What's that? That even when you think you're hidden away, even when you think you're just sleeping through life, someone might be watching over you. Someone might be keeping the glass warm for you. Above them, Fiona stood up. She stretched, her silhouette framed against the golden Colorado sun. She looked down one last time, gave a slow blink, and then turned, leading her family back into the trees. John Sterling adjusted his glasses, picked up his red pen, and went back to work. The house was quiet again, but it was no longer empty. It was full of life, full of memory, and full of the promise that if he just kept the light on, something wonderful might come out of the woods to find him.